watching World Today, a show that keeps you up to speed with the day's major global developments, and all eyes were on the two-day virtual leaders summit on climate, which was just now addressed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the session that is titled The Collective Sprint to 2030. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi asserted that India is doing its bit to combat climate change. India has already set a target, he said, of 450 gigawatts renewable energy capacity by 2030, and India's lifestyle is rooted in sustainability. He made a major announcement. He said that he and President Biden are launching the India-US Climate and Green Energy 2030 agenda. So some big takeaways from there. We'll tell you all about that. Let's get started with the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi participates in virtual leaders summit on climate, a summit being held on the initiative of US President Joe Biden. Black man shot dead by police serving warrant. North Carolina state officials open investigation into the fatal shooting by local sheriff's deputies serving him with a search warrant. Demand to free Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny erupts across Russia. France wants Russia. Foreign Minister says that the European Union would hold President Vladimir Putin and Russian authorities responsible if hunger-striking Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny died, and the bloc would impose new sanctions. US President Joe Biden announces tax credits to certain businesses that provide paid time off for their employees to get COVID-19 shots. Spain will offer between 5% and 10% of its COVID-19 vaccine shots to Latin American and Caribbean countries this year. Denmark to reopen the economy weeks earlier than planned. World observes Earth Day today to create awareness about pollution, highlight environmental issues including loss of biodiversity, increasing pollution, and to celebrate the environment of the blue planet. And let's begin with the big news that we are tracking at this hour. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the Leaders' Summit on Climate being held virtually over 2 days. He made his remarks in the Leaders' Session 1 on our collective sprint to 2030. And like I was telling you earlier, Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke about how India is combating climate change, how India has set a renewable energy capacity of 450 gigawatts by 2030 as its target. He said that India's lifestyle is rooted in sustainability. He gave a comparison of sorts, and he said that India's per capita carbon footprint is 60% lower than the global average. So that's some of the key takeaways of the Prime Minister's address. He said that for humanity to combat climate change, concrete action with high speed is needed. So let's take a look now at what exactly is on the agenda of this Leaders' Summit on Climate, which is currently underway. This is a two-day virtual summit that is being organized on the initiative of US President Joe Biden. So this is a two-day virtual summit on the initiative of US President Joe Biden. He had announced plans to organize such a summit on the 27th of January, that is a week after assuming office. Biden took action on first day in office to return US to Paris Accord. You would remember that a number of executive orders were signed by US President Joe Biden, and this of course was one important decision that was made on day one of his office. What else? Well, let's move on to the next slide now. On the 27th of January, Biden announced plan to convene a Leaders' Summit to tackle climate crisis. So like I said, within a week of taking over, this announcement was made. What next? Let's take a look at how this is important. Well, this is a key milestone on the road to COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021. So we are moving ahead to COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021, and this is in the run-up to that. Well, this is about goals and agenda, focuses on the need for major economies to strengthen climate ambition ahead of COP26. This is what the US expects major economies to do to enhance their climate ambition. Keep goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. This has been stipulated in the Paris Accord that was reached in 2015. And the idea is to ensure that there is no slackening as far as that goal is concerned. urgent need to scale up climate finance to be highlighted. A lot of focus on climate finance, on ensuring that there is enough climate finance with the developing countries to be able to ensure that they are not impacted by climate change and that climate mitigation and adaptation can take place. Focus on mobilizing private investment to finance the transition to net zero by 2050 and also focus on mobilizing public finance, like I said. Climate adaptation and resilience challenges faced by vulnerable countries, by all the countries, in fact, particularly vulnerable countries. There is going to be focus here as well, because there are several countries that are facing problems or challenges in attaining the goals that have been set out in the Paris Accord. Nature-based solutions in reducing emissions and strengthening climate resilience. There is focus on this as well. This would mean ensuring that there is less deforestation, ensuring that agricultural practices are more sustainable, ensuring that wetlands are protected, to name a few. Technological innovation to achieve net zero climate resilient economy. So these are the two objectives, net zero and climate resilient economy, that the United States has been talking about. It wants to achieve net zero by 2050. What does net zero mean? It means that whatever emissions are there in the atmosphere, they need to be removed by action. What else is there in terms of goals and agenda? Importance of accelerating public and private investment in climate innovation. So invest more, both put public money as well as private money in climate innovation, so that climate change can be combated and the effects of climate change can be minimized on economies the world over. Spotlight is on broad economic benefits of climate action with focus on job creation. So focus is on ensuring that countries that take adaptation as well as mitigation steps, their economies are not impacted, but they stand to gain and green jobs are created. Focus on global security challenges posed by climate change. There are security challenges in terms of economic security, energy security, national security, on impact on the capacity of various militaries to be able to secure their countries. So all that has to be tackled as well. Let's now take a look at what India is doing as far as fighting climate change is concerned. Well, India is leading climate change action because India has one of the largest renewable energy expansion programs, and Prime Minister mentioned that target of 450 gigawatts by 2030. This is by 2022 that you see, but this target is by 2030. India targeting 450 gigawatts capacity of renewable energy by 2030. Fourth largest installed capacity of renewable energy in the world is what India already has. What does it have in terms of wind power installed capacity? It has the fourth largest installed capacity of wind power in the world. And there is capacity in terms of solar power as well. Here too, India is the fifth largest. It has the fifth largest installed capacity of solar power in the world. Let's take a look at what else India is doing. India has reduced emission intensity by 21% over 2005 levels already. So India is doing quite a bit as far as its Paris goals are concerned. Solar capacity up from 2.63 gigawatts in 2014 to 36 gigawatts in 2020. So in solar capacity addition, we have multiplied 13 times the solar capacity. India pioneered two major initiatives, International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Both those initiatives were mentioned by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in his address a short while back to the Leaders Summit on Climate, where he was speaking on the collective sprint to 2030. Well, let's also try and take you through what else the Prime Minister said. Well, he said that we have encouraged initiatives like ISA and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, and India is welcoming partners to create templates for sustainable development in India. He said that this is going to help other developing countries get access to climate finance as well as climate technology. And our correspondent Abhishek is joining us. Abhishek, Prime Minister Narendra Modi emphasizing and asserting that India has done quite a bit in this fight against climate change, even though he said India's per capita carbon footprint is 60% lower than global average. So if you look at per capita emissions, India hasn't contributed much. But if you look at the kind of actions that India is doing quite a bit on a voluntary basis, just because it wants a more sustainable planet.
Of course, Moon, and this is what Prime Minister has tried to highlight, that we don't have that much of contribution in the globally increasing the CO2 emission level, but we still care because we care about the global concerns, and this is the time when we should join hands together and collectively fight for something that will be in the benefit for everybody in the who lives on this earth. And in fact, India's concern is also that as the global warming increases, as the Earth becomes inhospitable, it will be a direct implication that India's long coastal line of almost 7,500 kilometers that will be also under threat. The existence of so many people living off the coast and on whose livelihood depends on the coastal economy, they will also be under danger. And if we are talking just about the coastal lines and the people living along those coastal regions. But think about the nations which are almost situated in the middle of the sea, small island nations like Mauritius, Seychelles, Madagascar, and there are so many in Sri Lanka. There are so many other countries which are kind of heaven for vacation goers, but then they have their threat perception, they have their existential crisis because of the increasing CO2 level that is kind of melting the ice from the glaciers and increasing the sea level with each passing day. And we need to work right now so that we can protect the future of the upcoming generations. And this is what the world leaders are trying to say, that if we start working today, maybe in the next 15 or 20 years, we'll be able to make a difference. But if we sit idle and think that the damage is irreparable, we can't do enough, and everybody has their own concerns and their own vested interests of economic prosperity in their mind, then it will be very short-sighted, because the earth will not remain hospitable, will not remain the same as it is now. And with the kind of environment that we are foreseeing with this latest figures that are emerging from scientific researches across the globe of the CO2 emission and its adverse impact in the global climate, that is a very alarming situation. And if we need to protect the future generation, we need to work right now.
Abhishek, we are building up to COP26 in Glasgow in November this year, but still there is a lot of unfinished agenda. There were promises that were made in Copenhagen in 2009, and there were pre-2020 commitments also that the developed countries had to live up to. There was a commitment that was made that these developed countries will contribute $100 billion every year until 2020. But the question is, where is the money? And this is an issue that was highlighted earlier this month by Union Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar, that don't lose sight of pre-2020 commitments. Developing countries need climate finance and technology to be able to ensure that climate adaptation and mitigation takes place. Isn't that important? Shouldn't that be lost sight of?
In fact, Murmu, this is the one controversial issue that has been at the center of discussions in various of climate change summit and convention in the past, that developed countries who have had their development through this innovative technology in the past 2 decades, and who have actually contributed a lot in the global CO2 emission, and now they have better technology, better innovations, and financially also well placed to use that technology for the benefit of their own economy. But then that does not mean that they can impose on the now developing countries and emerging economies their set of rules, so that they should not be contributing those type of CO2 emission, because they don't have enough of technology and enough of finances to sustain a very high-grade technology which will have more greener footprinting and less CO2 footprint. So the time is that the developing nation, the group of developing nations and the smaller nations have been urging these developed countries that they should be sharing those technology and finances for a shared and common goal. The responsibility could be differentiated, but the goal is shared. The aim is shared, that we all want the earth to be protected and remain a hospitable planet. And for that, if one nation has a technology and finances and it does not offer another country for the sake of some economic benefit, maybe from 10 or 15 years now, that technology and that innovation will be of no use, because the damage would be far more done, and it will not be in a position to reclaim the state. So the crisis is that these developed nations are not, they claim, they commit in each and every climate summit, but the kind of initiative they should take to share their innovation, their technological expertise, and the finances to other smaller countries, that is not seen very. That is something that is not very encouraging in the past, and that this is the area of core concern and bone of contention of the time. We can only hope that in the next round of summit that all the world leaders join and they deliberate together. This area will also be highlighted, and the sharing of those resources and finances will be something that will be talked about.
Absolutely, Abhishek. Thank you so much for those inputs. Foreign Affairs Specialist, Strategic Affairs Analyst R.R. Rashmi, I understand, is joining us. We'll be talking to her in just a bit. But first, let's listen in to what Prime Minister Narendra Modi had to say in his address. Okay, we'll try and listen to Prime Minister's excerpts in just a bit. But before that, let's get more perspective on the address. Joining us is R.R. Rashmi. Ma'am, the Prime Minister said that President Biden and I are launching the India-US Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership. He said that together we will mobilize investments, demonstrate clean technologies and enable green collaborations. How significant is this announcement that India and US are working together to mobilize investments that could potentially not just help India, but also other developing countries who want access to green finance and technology?
Yes, in fact, this is a very significant announcement made by the Prime Minister. There is absolutely no doubt that US is the global leader in technologies across a very wide spectrum, and that includes clean energy. The challenges in fighting the menace of climate change is that we have to decarbonize the economic system, and that involves a transition away in the energy system from fossil fuel-based energy to renewable energy. Renewable energy means either solar or wind or hydro or hydrogen-based energy. So these are forms of clean energy. And some of these clean energies are not yet in the realm of practical application. They are still in the realm of technological development, for example, hydrogen technology. India has announced a national hydrogen mission this year in the budget. Prime Minister has been speaking about it. Now, this is a technology which is required to not only decarbonize the industrial processes, but also to decarbonize the transport system. So across a wide range of sectors, we will need new technologies, not just solar energy production, but for industrial decarbonization, to move away from the coal, which is implicit in any net zero emission goal by 2050. And these technologies are expensive. These technologies are yet under development. So they will have to be a global collaboration. So it's very important that the India and the US are planning to collaborate in these fields, and it's a very good sign.
So we've seen these statements that are made after every conference of parties takes place. Every time there is a statement made that developed countries will be contributing climate finance and green technology for developing countries so that they are able to adapt and mitigate, but we don't see action on the ground. Earlier we saw Donald Trump moving out of the Paris Accord, and despite the Copenhagen Accord saying that there will be a fund of $100 billion every year that will be provided to developing countries, we haven't seen action. Are you hopeful now that going forward now, as in the run-up to the Glasgow summit, we expect some concrete movement?
Well, it's difficult to say. Let's see how the things evolve for themselves. At least in the last 10 years, we haven't seen much of action. But if you go by the claims made by the developed countries, they are saying that they have met almost 68% to 70% of their target, which is of $100 billion per year. But what is actually happening is that large part of this so-called estimated amount of $100 billion is going not to the Green Climate Fund, but through the private channels on the multilateral financial channels. So all of it is being accounted for in the name of climate change. This is not being controlled by any UN appointed agency, but it is bilateral assistance, multilateral assistance. Everything is being counted towards climate finance. But that is one issue. So we will have to see how the developed countries live up to their commitments. But the problem is that any climate finance it's required both for mitigation and adaptation, which are the two critical dimensions of climate change. As far as mitigation is concerned, I think it's not so much the grant-based climate finance assistance which is required, because there we basically need to develop the technologies and develop the appropriate business models, which can help the industry move forward. But the critical part is adaptation and building resilience, where actually financial grants are required. And that is where I think we will have to see whether the developed countries mean what they are saying actually.
Absolutely. And what would you say to those who tend to compare India's commitments, its nationally determined contributions, with that of China? China has already declared that there will be a peaking of global greenhouse emissions in 2030, and by 2060 they are saying, not by 2050, they will be achieving net zero emissions. There are those countries who would want to club India and China together, but if you look at the per capita consumption in China and in India, there is a huge difference there, and the issue of historical responsibility cannot be lost sight of as well. Would you agree with that? Because not just United States, the European Union, but also a country like China has a historical responsibility, and hence no question of clubbing India with China.
Yes, it's unfair to put India at par with the developed countries and also amongst other economies, major economies of the world, which are much larger in size and in depth of their economy. India's contribution, as Prime Minister was saying, that it's just 40% of the global average CO2 emissions. India hasn't contributed much, but the kind of NDCs which India has put out in form of international commitments, India's performance is amongst the best. It's in fact amongst the G20 countries, India's performance is the best. So right now, the question is of concrete actions in the short term, not in the long term. Long term is at least 4 decades away. Most of the developed countries are talking about net zero emissions in 2050, but the challenge for climate stabilization and for economic and green economic growth is that we need to launch concrete actions immediately. So India will have to balance these two important goals of climate ambition as well as its economic growth. Its energy requirements have to grow. They will grow almost 4 times by the end of mid-century. And therefore, we will have to see this energy, the growing energy requirement is met from clean energy sources. So net zero goal is not an immediate goal for India. Its emissions are going to grow. Net zero goal will certainly, it's a global goal. It's not a countrywide goal. If the countries are, those countries which are in a position to declare so, they are welcome to do so. But for countries like India, which are on a rising growth path, which have to grow in order to provide for sustainable development in their country, they have to look at clean energy sources, and that needs investment, finance, and technology.
Yes, when John Kerry was in India and he was asked about whether US would like India to meet the net zero target, to that he said that he does not expect, or the United States does not expect India to pledge to that target, because India is already taking such actions that would eventually take it towards that target, and thus a public pronouncement or a declaration is not required because actions speak louder than words. So is there a recognition in the international community that India has not just taken actions which are domestic in nature, but has also come up with initiatives like the International Solar Alliance, in which several countries are now participating and tapping solar energy, and even something like the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, these initiatives taken by India are meant to advance global actions as well as domestic actions. India has taken lead, at least in the renewable energy and building climate resilient infrastructure through these two global alliances, ISA and the CDRI. And these are platforms created with global help, which can help raise global ambition and also mobilize international finance and technology. Countries, those which are willing, they can pool together their resources, their technologies, and move forward. So India has taken lead, and this is something remarkable for a country of India's size and India's global position. And this is extremely, it's an outstanding achievement, and I think we should we all be proud of it.
Yes, these are times of the COVID-19 global pandemic, and resources of several countries, including a country like India, stand restrained because a lot of the resources have had to be spent to tackle the pandemic. So do you think that when you look at solutions to combat climate change, this is something that should be part of the overall perspective, that countries like India and other developing countries need substantial climate finance, not just lip service or a token amount, to be able to ensure that we are all together able to achieve the target of ensuring that the rise in temperatures are not more than 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels by the end of the century?
Yes, the challenge of this global pandemic is getting expressed in the form of earmarking of available resources for fighting for creating livelihoods and protecting the lives of people. These are immediate challenges, as PM was emphasizing. The protecting the lives and livelihoods of the people in countries like India, they are of paramount importance. And COVID has created a situation where the countries which have scarce resources, they have to earmark a larger part of their resources for fighting these immediate needs. Climate change is also an urgent need, but it's a global problem. COVID is a problem which all countries are more or less fighting within their domestic boundaries with their own national resources. So India has a twin challenge here of fighting the climate change as well as fighting COVID. And we will have to, but we don't have to be disappointed by this, because there are opportunities in this. When we effect any economic transformation, the COVID provides the opportunity. The recovery process in the post-COVID world will provide an opportunity for us to move to systems which are cleaner in nature, based on cleaner energy, which are less energy intensive, and the kind of digital transformation that we are seeing is a good example of that. This is allowing the industry to save millions of dollars every year in terms of the industrial processes and work from home. So at times we can use these crises to create opportunities, and I think India is doing well in this.
Thank you, Mr. Rashmi, for having joined us with your inputs. Now, let's listen into some of the excerpts from Prime Minister Narendra Modi's address to the Leaders' Summit on Climate.
Your Excellency, President Biden, distinguished colleagues, my fellow citizens of this planet, Namaskar. I would like to thank President Biden for taking this initiative. Humanity is battling a global pandemic right now. And this event is a timely reminder that the grave threat of climate change had not disappeared. In fact, climate change is a lived reality for millions around the world. Their lives and livelihoods are already facing its adverse consequences. Friends, for humanity to combat climate change, concrete action is needed. We need such action at a high speed, on a large scale, and with a global scope. We in India are doing our part. Our ambitious renewable energy target of 450 gigawatts by 2030 shows our commitment. Despite our development challenges, we have taken many bold steps on clean energy, energy efficiency, afforestation, and biodiversity. That is why we are among the few countries whose NDCs are 2 degrees Celsius compatible. We have also encouraged global initiatives like International Solar Alliance, Lead IT, and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Friends, as a climate responsible developing country, India welcomes partners to create templates of sustainable development in India. This can also help other developing countries who need affordable access to green finance and clean technologies. That is why President Biden and I are launching the India-US Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 Partnership. Together, we will help mobilize investments, demonstrate clean technologies, and enable green collaborations. Friends, today, as we discuss global climate action, I want to leave one thought with you. India's per capita carbon footprint is 60% lower than the global average. It is because of our lifestyle is still rooted in sustainable traditional practices. So today, I want to emphasize the importance of lifestyle change in climate action. Sustainable lifestyles and guiding philosophy of back to basic must be an important pillar of our economic strategy for the post-COVID era. Friends, I recall the words of the great Indian monk, Swami Vivekananda. He called on us to arise, awake, and stop not until the goal is reached. Let us make this decade of action against climate change. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's make this decade the decade of action against climate change. That's how the Prime Minister concluded his address. You heard the entire address of Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivered at the Leaders Summit on Climate being held virtually. Today is day one of the summit. Let's move on now. Every year, 22nd April is observed as Earth Day to create awareness about pollution, highlight environmental issues, including loss of biodiversity, increasing pollution, and to celebrate the environment of the blue planet. Founded by Senator Gaylord Nelson, Earth Day was first observed in the year 1970. This year marks the 51st anniversary of Earth Day. The theme of the day this year is Restore Our Earth. The theme focuses on natural processes and emerging green technologies that can restore the world's ecosystems. In this way, the theme rejects the notion that mitigation or adaptation are the only way to address climate change. To mark Earth Day, Google has created a video doodle that highlights how we can all have a hand in helping create a brighter future for the planet. The doodle points out how we can plant a sapling at a time and save the planet. So the Leaders Summit is coinciding with Earth Day. North Carolina state officials have opened an investigation into the fatal shooting of a black man in his car by local sheriff's deputies serving him with a search warrant. The shooting unfolded on Wednesday morning in Elizabeth City, a riverfront town of about 18,000 residents in Pasquotank County near North Carolina's coastal border with Virginia, and small groups of protesters took to the streets by evening. Authorities identified the man who was slain as Andrew Brown Jr., a resident of Elizabeth City, and said only that he was shot when sheriff's deputies tried to serve him with a search warrant. NASA on Wednesday announced that its Perseverance rover has extracted the first sample of oxygen from Mars. The six-wheeled robot has converted a sample of the red planet's carbon dioxide-rich atmosphere into oxygen through an instrument aboard the rover known as the Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment, or MOXIE. According to NASA, this first conversion of carbon dioxide to oxygen could open up possibilities for further experimentation toward the goal of seeing humans on Mars in the future. As per NASA, Mars' atmosphere is 96% carbon dioxide. NASA called the first MOXIE conversion quite modest at 5 grams, equivalent to 10 grams or 10 minutes of breathable oxygen. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern Carolina, which is managed for NASA by Caltech in Pasadena, California, built and manages operations of the Perseverance rover. US President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have called the conviction of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd a step forward toward a more just America, but emphasized that more must be done. Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 charges: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree unintentional murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Floyd's killing in May had sparked worldwide protests and a reckoning on race in the US. It was a stunning moment in history when the much-awaited verdict was finally delivered. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted on the 20th of April of murdering George Floyd. A 12-member jury found Chauvin guilty of all 3 charges of second-degree murder, third-degree murder and manslaughter after considering 3 weeks of testimony from 45 witnesses, including bystanders, police officials and medical experts. In a confrontation captured on video, Chauvin, a white veteran of the police force, pushed his knee into the neck of Floyd, a 46-year-old black man in handcuffs, for more than 9 minutes on 25th May 2020. Chauvin and 3 fellow officers were attempting to arrest Floyd, accused of using a fake $20 bill to buy cigarettes at a grocery store. Chauvin, wearing a grey suit with a blue tie as well as a light blue face mask, nodded and stood quickly when the judge ruled that his bail was revoked. He was taken out of the courtroom in handcuffs and placed in the custody of Hennepin County Sheriff. This conviction triggered a wave of relief and reflection not only across the United States but across the globe. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of several hundred people erupted in cheers when the verdict was announced. At George Floyd Square in Minneapolis, the intersection where Floyd was killed and which was later named in his honor, people screamed, applauded, and some threw dollar bills in the air in celebration. US President Joe Biden, reacting to the verdict, said it is not enough and we can't stop here.
I feel relieved today that I finally have the opportunity for hopefully getting some sleep. A lot of days that I prayed and I hoped and I was speaking everything into existence. I said I have faith that he will be convicted. He was the first George Floyd. But today, you have the cameras all around the world to see and show what happened to my brother. It was a motion picture, the world seeing his life being extinguished. And I could do nothing but watch.
It was a murder in the full light of day, and it ripped the blinders off for the whole world to see. The systemic racism the Vice President just referred to. The systemic racism is a stain on our nation's soul. The knee on the neck of justice for Black Americans. Profound fear and trauma. The pain, the exhaustion that Black and brown Americans experience every single day. No one should be above the law. And today's verdict sends that message. But it's not enough. We can't stop here. In order to deliver real change and reform, we can and we must do more to reduce the likelihood that tragedies like this will ever happen and occur again. To ensure that Black and brown people, or anyone, so they don't fear the interactions with law enforcement, that they don't have to wake up knowing that they can lose their very life in the course of just living their life.
Today, we feel a sigh of relief. Still, it cannot take away the pain. A measure of justice isn't the same as equal justice. This verdict brings us a step closer And the fact is, we still have work to do. We still must reform the system.
Chauvin could now face up to 40 years in prison. The Minneapolis jurors found that Chauvin had crossed the line and used excessive force. Under Minnesota sentencing guidelines, Chauvin faces 12.5 years in prison for his murder conviction as a first-time criminal offender. Floyd's death prompted protests against racism and police brutality in many U.S. cities and other countries last summer, even as the world grappled with the coronavirus pandemic. The Minneapolis Police Department fired Chauvin and 3 other officers the day after Floyd's murder. The 3 others are due to face trial later this year on aiding and abetting charges. With Bureau Inputs, World Today Desk, DD India. And now news from Asia. The 5th batch of Rafale fighter jets arrived in India from a military airbase in France on Wednesday. The fighter jets flew a distance of almost 8,000 kilometers non-stop with air-to-air refueling support by France and UAE's Air Force. The jets were flagged off by Chief of Air Staff Air Chief Marshal R.K.S. Bhadauria from Mérignac Air Base amid his ongoing 5-day official visit to France. Indian Air Force has thanked both the air forces for their cooperation. A car bomb blast ripped through a luxury hotel's parking area in the southwestern Pakistani city of Quetta, killing 4 people and wounding 11. The Pakistan Taliban claimed the bombing, and a senior police official, Azhar Akram, said that China's ambassador to Pakistan was staying at the hotel but was not there when the bomb exploded. He was at a function. Balochistan Provincial Minister Mir Ziaullah Langov told that the Chinese ambassador was safe. The Chinese embassy did not respond to a request for comment. Indonesian rescuers deployed ships to help the search operation for a submarine that went missing on Wednesday, with 53 people on board. The 44-year-old submarine KRI Nagala 408 was conducting a torpedo drill in waters north of the island of Bali, but failed to relay the results. The Defence Ministry said that an aerial search has found an oil spill near the submarine's dive location, and 2 naval vessels with sonar capability have been deployed to assist in the search. A Navy official mentioned that the oil spill found on the surface could mean that there was damage to its fuel tank, or could also be a signal from the crew. It is said that the ship could fall to a depth of 600 to 700 meters in a static diving due to blackout. The submarine was built to sustain pressure at a maximum depth of around 250 meters. Free Navalny protest marches took place in Russian cities calling for the release of the Kremlin critic, even as diplomatic pressure increased on China, with France's foreign minister saying that the European Union would hold President Vladimir Putin and Russian authorities responsible if hunger-striking Navalny died, and could pave the way for new sanctions on Russia.
The demand to free Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny erupted across Russia. Police arrested many protesters as Russians in dozens of cities took part in rallies organized by allies. Demonstrations were called to be held in more than 100 cities. Protesters in central Moscow chanted, "Freedom to Navalny," and "Let the doctors in." Navalny's wife Yulia also joined the rally in the capital, where demonstrators chanted her name. As the rallies broke out across the country, heavy police presence was also spotted nationwide. Navalny's spokeswoman was jailed for 10 days and another close ally detained. This on the same day that President Vladimir Putin delivered a State of the Nation speech warning the West not to cross Russia's red lines and pointedly made no mention of Navalny. France's foreign minister told Russia on Thursday that the European Union would hold President Vladimir Putin and Russian authorities responsible if hunger-striking Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny died, and said the bloc would impose new sanctions.
Dérive autoritaire interne.
We will take the necessary sanctions and we will hold Mr. Putin and Russian authorities responsible for this tragedy. I hope we won't get to that extreme. There is an internal authoritarian shift. This relentless attack on Navalny is unbearable. It's the symbol of an internal authoritarian shift. The fact that yesterday protesters were arrested yesterday because they were protesting in support of Mr. Navalny, and the mere fact that even Mr. Navalny's health is in danger.
US Embassy officials in Moscow also met Russian officials on Wednesday to discuss topics that included Russia's response to the latest US sanctions.
US Embassy officials in Moscow met today with Russian officials to discuss various bilateral topics, including the Russian response to our announcement last week on April 15th. We expect these discussions will continue in the coming days. We'll review the details of the Russian actions as we were notified officially of some elements today. At the same time, we continue to believe that the best way forward is through thoughtful dialogue and diplomatic engagement going forward.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on Wednesday said that President Biden never said that he expected that one set of sanctions on Russia would immediately change behavior.
Well, first, our sanctions were put in place, and many of them done in coordination with our European partners and allies, because our strong view and the view of the global community is that there should be consequences for actions. We have never expected, nor have we projected, that one set of sanctions or any individual set of sanctions is going to immediately change behavior. But it is sending a clear message that behavior is unacceptable and it can't continue. I would also remind you that our consequences, as we've long said, many are seen, sanctions, and some are unseen, and we don't speak about more specifically.
UN human rights experts urged Moscow to let Navalny be medically evaluated abroad. They said they believed his life was in danger as he was being held in conditions that could amount to torture. The 44-year-old Kremlin critic, who last year survived a nerve agent attack that Russian authorities denied carrying out, is thin and weak after starving himself for 3 weeks in prison, and his allies say he risks kidney failure or cardiac arrest. The confrontation over Navalny's fate is a flashpoint in Moscow's dire relations with the West. It is already aggravated by economic sanctions and diplomatic expulsions. With Bureau Inputs, World Today Desk, DD India.
And US President Joe Biden on Wednesday announced tax credits to certain businesses that provide paid time off for their employees to get COVID-19 shots, as he seeks to get corporate America more involved in the vaccination campaign. Biden said the tax credits would apply to businesses with fewer than 500 employees. In his speech, Biden also said he expects the U.S. to reach his 100-day goal of getting 200 million coronavirus vaccine shots in arms by the end of the day, even as the nation faces an increase in infections.
I'm calling on every employer, large and small, in every state to give employees the time off they need with pay to get vaccinated, and any time they need with pay to recover if they're feeling under the weather after the shot. No working American should lose a single dollar from their paycheck because they chose to fulfill their patriotic duty of getting vaccinated.
Biden said the vaccine effort is entering a new phase, with everyone over the age of 16 now eligible to be vaccinated. The U.S. president said 80% of all seniors have received at least one shot, leading to a dramatic decline in the deaths of elderly Americans.
To Americans 16 years and older, it's your turn now. Now. So go get your vaccine before the end of May. We can do this. And we'll do this as long as we don't let up.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez on Wednesday said Spain will offer between 5% and 10% of its COVID-19 vaccine shots to Latin American and Caribbean countries this year. The Iberian country aims to have half of its population of 47 million fully inoculated by the end of July. So far, around 7.6% have received a full course, while nearly 21% have received at least one dose. Under an EU coordinated purchasing scheme, Spain is entitled to over 93 million vaccine doses this year. Top UN financial and vaccine officials last week urged rich countries to donate excess COVID-19 vaccine doses to the COVAX vaccine sharing program, supplying lower income countries which aim to buy up to 1.8 billion doses in 2021. With Denmark reporting less number of new COVID-19 cases, the country has started to reopen the economy weeks earlier than planned. Restaurants and cafes are now allowed to provide indoor service. Denmark has avoided a third wave of the COVID-19 epidemic after imposing wide lockdown measures in December, which slowed the epidemic considerably to between 500 to 700 daily infections from several thousands in December. Denmark now sees gradual reopening of shopping malls, museums, libraries and indoor sports for people under 18. Football fans will also be able to return to stadiums in separate sections, each holding 500 spectators. All spectators must show corona passports and will be registered with a view to trace any new outbreaks of the virus. And now let's go back in time and see what major events occurred on this day in the past.
On this day in 1915, the Second Battle of Ypres started when German troops released clouds of deadly chlorine gas on British troops. It was the first major gas attack of World War I. On this day in 1969, the British yachtman Robin Knox Johnston arrived at Falmouth after completing the first solo non-stop circumnavigation of the Earth in 312 days. In 1994, former US President Richard Nixon died aged 81. He was the 37th President of the United States from 1969 until his resignation in 1974 over the Watergate scandal. On this very day in 1997, Peruvian troops stormed the Japanese ambassador's residence in Lima, freeing 71 hostages held by Marxist Tupac Amaru guerrillas. 1 hostage, 3 soldiers and all 14 guerrillas were killed. In 2004, on this day, a train laden with explosives blew up at a station near the center of Ryongchon in North Korea. At least 161 people were killed, hundreds injured, and nearly 2,000 homes destroyed in the blast. On this day in 2005, Zacarias Masosi, the only person charged in the United States in connection with the September 11 attacks, pleaded guilty and said Osama bin Laden had handpicked him to fly a plane into the White House on this day. And in 2014, on this day, first PLO delegation in Gaza since 2007 arrives for unity talks with Hamas.
That's it then in this edition of World Today. Thanks for watching.